Despite the recession, pay rates of Canadian CEOs relative to the average workers hit historic highs in recent years. A movement is afoot to help close that salary gap. And joining us now to tell us more about these efforts, Peter MacLeod, Executive Director with the Wagemark Foundation. And as I welcome you here to TVO, let's just get the first thing on the record right away. What's Wagemark?
Well, Wagemark is a new international certification system that we've created that organizations and corporations apply to. Consumers are used to purchasing fair trade coffee now. We know dolphin-friendly tuna in the supermarket, forest-friendly paper when you're buying, paper for your printer. But we wanted to create a mark that was about wage-responsible businesses. So if you're an organization that's proud of what you pay and that makes sure that there isn't an excessive differential between the top and bottom earners in your organization, then Wagemark's for you.
So if somebody runs that kind of a business, they come to you, they say, here's what the CEO's making, here's what the employees are making, and you give them the wage mark?
Then we give them a wage mark, but we're really interested in the ratio between the top and bottom. And if we want to get technical about it for a second, it's not the absolute lowest paid employee in the organization, it's the average wage of the bottom 10% of that workforce, right? So we're comparing the bottom decile then to the top. But what's really interesting is that over the course of the past 30 years, we've seen a huge gap open up. Traditionally, the pay rates between CEOs and their workers was on the order of maybe 20 or 30 to 1. And today in the US, it stands at about 300 to 1. And in Canada, because we're still a little more modest here, we keep it about 170 to 200 to 1.
What's appropriate?
Well, that's really a matter of opinion. At Wagemark, we've set it, and this will sound quite aggressive, at 8 to 1. And we found 8 to 1 by looking at the history of wage ratios, whether it was Plato who proposed 4 to 1 in ancient Athens, or whether it was even J.P. Morgan, who in the Gilded Era proposed that it shouldn't exceed 20 to 1. Ben and Jerry's said 7 to 1. There's a fascinating history about this. But basically, we looked at a rate that we felt would still be competitive, that would still be able to reward talent. There's a big difference in a company between someone making 50 and someone making 400, and an 8 to 1 world accommodates that.
What got you turned on to this issue in the first place?
Well, I think it's probably hard to turn on a television station these days and not have some reference made to income inequality. It's probably in some ways a bit of a after effect of the Occupy movement and the 2008 recession. But I also think it's really the makings of the next major social movement. What we're dealing with here in this 300 to 1 world, I mean, Oxfam just came out 2 weeks ago saying that 85 people control half the world's wealth. The World Economic Forum at Davos just last week declared that income inequality globally was probably the single issue most likely to cause social unrest over the course of the next decade. So what drew me to it? Probably what's drawing everybody to it these days. It's a matter of urgent and pressing concern, whether you're on this side of the planet or the other.
In the same way, though, if someone goes to a store and sees, oh, that's fair trade chocolate, okay, I'm going to buy that. Do you want businesses to come to you for that kind of certification, or do you go out hunting for businesses to put it upon them? How does it work?
Right. Well, it works with a little bit of each right now. I mean, we're starting to get organizations who are applying through our website and saying, we're at 8 to 1 or better, and we'd like to recognize that. We see it as a mark of distinction. We're conspicuously ethical as a company, so help us with that, and we're pleased to. And then we're also taking our case to different industries and saying, actually, I think you're a good candidate for this. We've just opened up a new registry where regardless of your ratio, you can enroll with Wagemark. And the idea there is to then work with municipalities, other levels of government, and their procurement systems to say that, all right, if we're going to use public dollars to buy your goods and services, at least tell us what that differential is.
Do you want every business in this country signing up for this?
Well, I think every business in the country ought to consider disclosing what that wage ratio is. It's perhaps one of the last taboos in our society to talk about what we make, owe, and spend. But some of the social research is so persuasive right now, and the economic research as well, that allowing this degree of inequality to continue to spread really constitutes a social pollutant. We know that it's bad across OECD countries. It's an important correlation with mental health. We know that it is bad for democracies because it really pulls those societies apart. People need different things from the state. And better than that, we know that it's bad for business, right? It's not actually part of the recipe to create a high-performing economy.
But I guess what you're saying is, in the best of all possible worlds, every company would have an 8-to-1 ratio, because you find that those are the conditions that create the best, the fairest, the most just, etc. Can you really say that?
Every company would disclose, and sure, every Wagemark certified company would be 8-to-1. But I'm happy to defer to someone like Peter Drucker, who was the great dean of American management thinking. And it was interesting when things first started to decouple in the 1970s. I mean, this is a man who consulted to GE and GM and Coca-Cola, right? Top of the American industry. He wrote a series of op-eds in the Wall Street Journal that said the most radical but necessary innovation in American business is actually to create a fixed ratio within companies.
What did he put the number at?
He pegged it at 15-to-1.
15?
Yeah, 15-to-1. And hey, I'm not going to quibble. If we want to settle on 15-to-1 this afternoon, I'll go for it because, of course, it's miles better than today's status quo.
How many people work at your foundation?
We've got 4 of us right now, beavering away.
Are you 8-to-1?
We are better than 8-to-1, absolutely.
What are you guys?
We're a 1-to-1 organization.
Everybody's making the same thing.
Everyone's making the same as we get started.
Would you acknowledge that probably doesn't make sense for the vast majority of businesses in the world?
Absolutely. But the real question is for those CEOs who are making 300 times their average workers, who are making 10 times more than a CEO did just 20 or 30 years ago. Are they 10 times more talented? Are they 10 times more productive? Is their talent somehow 10 times more scarce than it was?
Well, help me understand this a little better, because what you've done is you've made a decision that in order to get the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, your, you'll forgive me, arbitrary standard makes more sense than the marketplace. The marketplace, for all of its ills, often decides, let's take Goldman Sachs for lack of a better expression.
Absolutely.
They've decided that Goldman Sachs' CEO is so valuable to the bottom line of that company, he's worth, I'm plucking the numbers out of thin air here, he's worth 300 times more than the average of the bottom 10% of the people who work at the company. And their shareholders are happy to be making the money and are raking it in, and they don't care about getting a Wagemark.
Well, we don't want to completely overturn market logic here. And what's interesting is that this is in many respects a cultural phenomenon. If you go to Japan, if you go to Northern Europe, these kinds of wage differentials aren't anywhere near as extreme as you find in North America. And these are, again, high-performing, competitive, innovative, talented economies that manage to attract some of the best executives. When you start to peel the onion on this issue, you find that there are a lot of things going on. Some like Roger Martin will tell you that it was the shift in the 1980s to a pay-for-performance paradigm, where we fundamentally restructured how we pay for talent, and that's created this kind of flywheel where people are paid more and more and more. I think we just need to question what's going on, and Wagemark is just one kind of modest intervention to try and do that.
No, I get you, but do you think there are any CEOs out there who are worth 300 times more than the average of the bottom 10% of the employees at the companies that they lead?
No. I don't think so, because I think ultimately, however talented they might be, they rely on all of their colleagues and coworkers to be able to deliver that success. And there's an important correlation between worker morale, right? Long-term economic performance rather than a short-term bump in a stock price. It's really about how you think about business, and it's not about the quick hit, and it's not about the great man theory of enterprise.
Well, let me try this. Jose Bautista for the Blue Jays probably makes $15 million a year.
Right.
The guy they brought up from the minors, Kawasaki, who played some short and second base last year, probably made the major league minimum of about $350,000.
Yeah.
That's not 8-to-1.
That's not 8-to-1.
Is that problematic?
Yeah, of course. I mean, professional sports, of course, this is what prompted Roger Martin to write his book about fixing the game, about the NFL and compensation practices there.
That's a different model because that's socialism. We're not talking socialism here. We're talking capitalism in Major League Baseball. And And on the Major League Baseball roster, that is the Toronto Blue Jays,
Yeah.
there is a wide and vast disparity of income, which reflects the wide and vast disparity of talent.
Well, happily, we don't need to just rely on some certification system to deal with this challenge, right? But just look at what's happening around the world right now. I mean, we see the reemergence of the whole discussion about guaranteed annual incomes, something that had really slipped away over the course of the past decade and is now back. We see renewed conversation about progressive taxation, about estate taxes. We see raises being made to the minimum wage. We see a conversation about the living wage movement. So this is just bubbling up from all different corners. In Switzerland, just in the past 3 months, they actually had a national referendum on whether, and this would be very difficult if Switzerland was ever to field a professional baseball team or something, but they would have a 12-to-1 national ratio, which means that no one in a company could make more in a month what someone else made in a year. And whether it's about business performance or some kind of vague political idea, I think that resonates with a lot of people as just like fair, as just like a kind of ethical norm that maybe we've lost track of.
Okay, so in our last 30 seconds here, Peter, I wonder how you get there. Is it by making the people at the top earn a lot less, or by paying the people at the bottom a lot more?
Well, it's about, I think, just being more candid and transparent about those pay practices. And Wagemark is just one route to try and share those numbers out. And I think ultimately over the course of the next 5 or 6 years, you're going to see a lot more activity in this area. And whether it's Wagemark standards or other mechanisms that are applied, this is going to be the way that modern societies have to get a hold of these disparities.
How many businesses have signed up so far?
We've got just 50 now.
50?
50.
In the city of Toronto?
In Canada.
In Canada, okay.
And we're headed to the US and the UK this spring.
Huh, okay. Well, we thank you for coming in tonight and sharing your views about it.
My pleasure.
That's Peter MacLeod, the founding director of Wagemark Foundation, where the ratio is 1-to-1. You guys are so good.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.